Hello again. We are going to be talking today about compound meter. So we talked before about simple meter, kind of talked about how meter works and then what simple meter is. Compound meter works in a very similar way. So it's still a meter, it still organizes rhythms into groups of strong and weak beats. You can still have duple meter, triple meter, or quadruple meter within compound meter. Because remember that that's just talking about the number of beats you have in a measure. So regardless of what happens with those beats, you still are going to have a certain number per measure, and that's the organization part. But when you're in compound meter, it's going to be different than simple meter in one really important way. So remember, when we have simple meter, we have a division of each beat into two equal parts. So for example, if the beat is a quarter note, you can divide a quarter note equally into two parts and you get 2/8 notes. But if you're in compound meter, the beat does not divide equally into two equal parts. The beat divides equally into three equal parts. So you can't have a quarter note getting the beat in a compound meter because a quarter note does not divide equally into three parts. There's no way to, well, okay, there's a way to do it, but not like just using regular note values. In terms of like the rhythms that we went over with the rhythm tree. So to do compound meter, you have to have different note values that are getting the beat. In fact, the only way that you can do this is to have a dotted note get the beat. So if you think about what a dot does, it adds half again as much of your value of the note itself. So if you have a dotted quarter note, it adds another 1/8 note worth of duration to that note. So if you have a dotted quarter note, that means you have a duration of 2/8 notes in the quarter plus an extra 1/8 note in the dot. That makes 3/8 notes worth of duration. So you can divide a dotted quarter note equally into 3/8 notes. You can do the same thing with any dotted note. So if I have a dotted half note, that half note will divide equally into two quarter notes, and the dot also represents the duration of a quarter note. So a dotted half note can be equally divided into 3 quarter notes. I'll show you what I'm talking about. So here I have a dotted quarter note. Quarter note with a dot on it is the same as 3/8 notes tied together. A half note with a dot on it is the same as 3 quarter notes tied together. So just by definition, anytime you have a dotted note, that note can be equally divided into 3 equal parts, not 2. Actually, you could not divide these equally into 2 parts, but only into 3. And this is how it works with these regular note values that we have. So whenever we have a compound meter, the beat is divided into 3. That means the beat has to be a dotted note. So just let that sink in for a second. In a simple meter, the beat is a note without a dot, just a regular note value. But in compound meter, the beat has to be a dotted note. Sometimes I like to talk about the difference between simple and compound meter by like how the meter feels, like the feel of it. So simple meter has kind of like a march type of feel to it. So like 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and so there the ands are dividing my beats equally into 2 parts. But if I have a compound meter, it's more of a how to describe it. It's kind of like more of a sway instead of a straight back and forth, or kind of like a lilting kind of feel. A little bit. That's kind of a bad way to describe it, but you'll see what I mean. So if if it's divided into 3, remember each beat divided into 3, so it feels like this: 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and so that was a quadruple meter because I had 4 beats in every measure. I was counting to 4, but each beat was divided into 3 parts, so it just has a little bit of a different feel that way. So you can get the sense of this by practicing that on your own, just like counting. Say you're going to do a triple meter and simple. So if you do simple triple, is what we say. You always say the type of meter first and then how many beats are in the measure. So simple triple means each beat is divided into 2 equal parts and there are 3 beats in a measure. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3, and so you can practice that kind of thing on your own. Or I could say I'm going to do a compound duple. That means I have each beat is divided into 3 equal parts and I have 2 beats in every measure. So 1 and 2 and 1 and 2, and that's a compound duple. So you can practice these on your own, and it seems a little silly, but it actually does help to kind of get that sound in your head. I think meter is sometimes a little bit easier to think about if you think about how it sounds rather than just how it looks on the page. I think that makes it harder sometimes. It just feels like a lot of numbers and notes kind of floating around, but it actually has a lot to do with how things sound. So thinking about that can actually really help you, I think. Okay, so I'm talking about simple and I'm talking about compound, and it's, I think, sometimes a little bit confusing to use those terms because simple makes it sound like it's easy, and simple meter is the one we want to do because it's not going to be hard at all, and compound meter makes it sound like it's really complex and going to be scary. But actually that's not really true. Like, a lot of simple meters are actually difficult and a lot of compound meters are pretty easy. So this is just the terms that we use to talk about them, but it doesn't really describe how they are to listen to or how they are to perform. So you've probably, if you've played music, you've probably encountered some simple meters that are very challenging, because the challenging part of performing usually has more to do with the rhythms and the pitches and how those are organized than it does with the actual meter. The meter is just, I don't know, sometimes the meter can make it difficult too, but it doesn't necessarily mean, simple doesn't mean easy in this case. So it's just talking about how we can think about the division of each beat. It's just the term we use. Now, I will say that if you want to have some sort of association with simple, maybe you could think that reading the time signature for simple meter is pretty basic, pretty easy, right? We talked about how the top number of the time signature in simple meter is the number of beats in a measure, and the bottom number shows us the unit of the beat. That's pretty straightforward. I think that is often the kinds of things that we learn when we're first taking music lessons or we're first learning about music or how to read meters. We usually learn that and it sticks pretty well. But compound meters are a little more complicated in terms of the time signatures, and this has to do with the fact that we don't have a regular note value getting the beat. We have a dotted note getting the beat. So there's not really a good way to show a dotted note value with a number. So I can say 8 for an eighth note, or I can say 2 for a half note, because that makes sense in terms of fractions, but I don't know how to say dotted half note with a number. So this makes our time signatures a little more complicated to do, and so I'm going to show you how this works. And this might be something that you want to, especially if you've not learned this before, you might actually want to review this a couple times and let me know if you have questions, because I think it does make things a little bit more complicated to think through. But I'm going to walk you through it step by step, and it hopefully won't be a problem. Okay, so let me show you what this looks like in notation. Okay, so we're going to do compound meter. And we're going to do time signatures. Time signatures for compound meter are similar to simple meter in that you have 2 numbers, one on top of the other. But this time the number that goes on top and the number that goes on bottom are going to show us something different than they do in simple meter. The best way to think about this, I think, is to think when you're in simple meter, the time signature refers to the beat. You're talking about how many beats you have and the unit of the beat. But when you're in compound meter, because we can't really define a dotted note in terms of a number, and the dotted note is the beat, it makes it too hard to try to refer to the beat with a time signature. So what we have to do instead is refer to something else that has just a regular note value. Look up here at our dotted notes. Remember how we divided these dotted notes into 3 equal parts? When we've divided them, we ended up getting a division. So we would say this is the unit of beat. If the dotted quarter note is the unit of beat, then the unit of division is whatever that divides into in 3 parts. So 3/8 notes, that means if we have a dotted quarter note as the beat, the unit of division is an 1/8 note. If the unit of beat is a dotted half note, the unit of division then is a quarter note. Okay, so you can think about it like this, and notice that the unit of division always ends up being a regular note value, no dots. So when we're talking about a compound meter time signature, we're not going to deal with the unit of beat. We're going to deal with the unit of division. So if I want to show that the dotted quarter note is my beat, I'm going to always be talking about this next level. Instead of talking about the level of beat, I'm going to talk here about the level of division. Compound meter always deals, a compound meter time signature always deals with the level of division. This just means you have to think about it a little bit differently. It's not actually that difficult when you get it down. It just takes a switch in your head. If you start thinking about beats again, you're going to be a little bit confused. So, if I have a time signature that looks like this is probably one that you've seen before. 6/8, that's a pretty common time signature. Perhaps you didn't even realize that it was compound meter because you're so used to doing it. But this does not mean that we have 6 beats and the 8th note gets the beat. We don't have a type of meter. We haven't talked about a type of meter that has 6 beats in a measure. We've only talked about duple, triple, and quadruple, and none of those fit into 6. Okay, so this is a compound meter. With a compound meter, the top number shows us the number of, you know what I'm going to say? We're dealing with division, right? This is the number of divisions that we have. So if I'm dealing with this, I'm going to have either 6 1/8 notes or 6 quarter notes in a beat, depending on what my beat is. So number of divisions is the top number. The bottom number is not the unit of beat, but the unit of, that's right, division. So in fact, this does mean that I have 6 1/8 notes in the measure, but it does not mean that the 8th note is the beat. So I can write 6 1/8 notes. This would fit within a measure, but that doesn't tell me anything about the organization of the beat. And it's actually very hard to read it that way because we have all those flags. So how can I find out what the beat is actually by looking at this? Well, it's a great question. So if I know my unit of division is 8, an 8th note, this is a unit of division, and I know that compound meter, every beat is divided into 3, then I know that 3 divisions will equal a beat. I'm going to say that again. If I know that an 8th note is my unit of division, and I know that in compound meter there are always 3 units of division within a beat, because that's what compound meter means. The beat is divided into 3 divisions. That means that 3 1/8 notes make up one beat. Now we showed up here that 3 1/8 notes combine to make a dotted quarter note. That means for 6/8, the unit of beat is a dotted quarter note. How many dotted quarter notes are in this measure? Well, if we group another group of 3, we'll find the same thing. So in one measure of 6/8, we end up with a unit of beat of the dotted quarter note, and we end up with 2 of them. So this is a duple meter because there are 2 beats in each measure. Alright, so I walked you through that. That kind of took a while, right? It's not really that difficult. It just feels like it. So I know it seems really crazy. We're going to do a few more, and I'll show you how to work through this. A little bit of a shortcut that you can think about, actually, which might save you a bit of time, is because we're talking about groups of 3 and such with compound meter. If you look at the top number of your time signature, if you divide this number by 3, you'll get how many beats you have in a measure. So 6 divided by 3 equals 2. That means there are 2 beats in a measure. And if I think about 3 of these unit of divisions, or units of division, I guess I should say, 3 of these will make up 1 beat. So I can turn this into a little bit of a simpler problem this way. The top number divided by 3 equals how many beats? The bottom number 3 times, that note value 3 times, equals the unit of beat. And that's just what we did here. I just kind of did it in long form here. So again, you can write out 6/8 notes, and that is how many are in each measure, but that doesn't tell you anything about the grouping of beats. So it's actually really important that you know how beats are grouped, because you would not want to count this measure in 6. That would get to be a little tedious. Counting it in 2 helps. And that's how you get this lilting feel to it, because each beat then is divided into 3 equal parts. Let me show you another one. Here's another compound meter. The top number indicates the number of divisions, so we're going to have 9 divisions. But we could divide that number by 3 and get 3, so we know there are 3 beats. In every measure. The bottom number is not the unit of beat. The bottom number does refer to a quarter note, but it does not refer to the unit of beat. Remember, it refers to the unit of division. So I'm going to have 9 quarter notes in each measure, but that does not tell me what the beat is. But I can get there. So if I think about the division is always a division of 3, so I can add 3 quarter notes together. What kind of dotted note does that make? Well, you add the first 2 together, and that gives you a half note. And then the second one is always going to be the dot. Or sorry, the third one is a dot. So add the first 2 notes together makes a half note. The third one will end up being the dot. So we have a dotted half note gets the beat. So I can write this like this with 9 quarter notes. It's going to take a while. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Or, that's like impossible to read, right? I can't even count that many without like pointing at them or covering some up because there's so many. But I could think about it like this. 1, 2, 3 beats in the measure, and the dotted half note gets the beat. All right, let's try one more. This is a triple meter because we have 3 beats in the measure. Let's do a quadruple meter. For a quadruple meter, we're always going to have 12 as the top number here because if we divide that by 3, we get 4. 4 beats in each measure. Let's make the bottom number, let's make this 8 again. So remember the bottom number is the unit of division. If I have 3/8 notes, what dotted note makes up my beat? We put the first two notes together, makes a quarter note. The third note makes a dot. So here we have 4 beats, and the dotted quarter note gets the beat. So I could write out 12 eighth notes. I'm not going to do that just yet. I'll show you in a second. But I could have 4 beats here, dotted quarter note, and this means I have a quadruple meter because I have 4 beats. I would call this a compound quadruple because it's a compound meter. Each beat divides into 3, but I have 4 beats in the measure. So this is not to be confused with a triple meter where you have 3 beats in a measure. That's just triple meter, 3 beats to the measure, but compound is always talking about the division of each beat, kind of on a lower level of that. A little bit more of a detailed idea. Okay, you'll notice something that no, actually I didn't do this yet. So you will not notice it because it didn't happen yet, but I'm going to show you something and then you can notice it. Okay, so if I just wanted to write out all of my eighth notes here, I could write out 12 eighth notes. And if I wrote them with flags, like here, in my 6/8, I wrote them with flags. And they just kind of look like they're just kind of out there floating by themselves. So something you can do to show the beat if you do have eighth notes, instead of using flags, you can use beams. Beaming is actually really useful in notation because beams can show us where the beat falls when we have these shorter note values. See how I'm beaming the notes together that fall within the same beat? This is always how you want to beam stuff. You always beam to the beat. Anything that goes together in a beat, instead of using a flag, you'll use a beam. Anything that goes in a different beat, you will not attach with the beam. So I would never attach this note and this note together with a beam because that's where the beat is broken here. That's where you go to the next beat. I can't do that if I'm using quarter notes because quarter notes don't have flags. If I started beaming them together, they would become eighth notes. I don't want to do that. So it's actually more difficult to read a meter kind of like this when you have a lot of quarter notes instead of when you have eighth notes or 16th notes or something else that has a flag or a beam on it, because then you can attach them together. So just remember, you always beam to the beat. Anything that falls within one beat gets a beam that attaches it, if it can take a beam to begin with. Anything that falls within another beat would never attach the beam. You always break the beam in between beats. Okay, so just to review, this little sheet. Okay, so we have 2 levels of thinking about beats. We have the level of beat, we have the level of division. If we're in a simple meter, the division is in 2, and the beat is just a regular note value with no dot. But if we're in compound meter, the beat is a dotted note, and the division is into 3. But still your division is a regular note value. So when we talk about compound meter time signatures, we're talking about numbers that refer to the divisions instead of that refer to the beats. So the top number does not refer to the number of beats, it refers to the number of divisions. And the bottom number does not refer to the unit of beat, it refers to the unit of division. But otherwise, it's very similar to what we did with simple meter. We just have to think about division instead of beat. And remember, when you're beaming, always beam to the beat. That's true no matter what meter you're in. If you're in simple or if you're in compound, if you're in duple, triple, or quadruple, it doesn't matter. If you have beams, you're writing notation, your beams should always show you exactly where the beat falls. Okay, so remember how to find what your unit of beat is and how many beats you have per measure by this time signature. One more thing I wanted to say is that you'll notice I said in the simple meter video that when you have a simple meter, you know it's simple because the top number of your time signature is either 2, 3, or 4. You know you're in compound meter if the top number of your time signature is 6, 9, or 12. And this is because you can divide them by 3 to find out how many beats you have, then 6 is always duple times 3. So 2 times 3 is 6, that's a duple meter. 9 is 3 times 3, so that's a triple meter. And 12 is 4 times 3, so that's quadruple meter. So if your top number is 2, 3, or 4, it's simple. But if it's 6, 9, or 12, it's compound. So that's how you can know which types of things you're going to start thinking about when you get to your time signatures to determine what's happening in the meter. If you have your top number being 2, 3, or 4, you start doing simple meter operations on it. And if your top number is 6, 9, or 12, you'll start doing the compound meter operations with it. So once more, I'm just going to say it again, just to review this. Compound meter means that your beat is divided equally into 3 parts. That means your unit of beat is a dotted note. It can be any dotted note, really. So your time signature cannot refer to the beat because there's no good way with a number to refer to a unit of beat that has a dot on it. But you can refer to the division of the beat because the division is a regular note value. So with simple meter, your top and bottom numbers of your time signature refer to the beat itself. But in compound meter, the top and bottom numbers of the time signature refer to the division of the beat. If you remember this, you'll know everything you need to know about compound meter. And no matter what meter I throw at you, you'll be able to figure it out. So just always keep that in mind. Make sure that you understand that. And other than that, I think you're good to go. So good luck with this, and I will talk to you soon.